What's up? How's it going? Narc. Alright, I'm just streaming for a little bit today, trying to work on a little game little game I've been playing around with. So far the code is pretty messy, so I'm trying to figure out a better way to like construct it, organize it. But what we have here is you can actually like move around the board and we can interact with things. So for example, I can pick up that tree, and when you do that, I want to actually like add some resources to your player. That's all we got. Super basic, and other people can connect together as well. So like I can load up another tab and we could have two players walking around. I also have shooting. I forgot about that. I added shooting, so I need to figure out what the next steps are. I think collision might be pretty cool. So like I could have the player collide with some other things. So let's try to figure out how to do that. Now I think right now how it works is like the map is kind of hard coded on the front end. Not the best. What we're going to do instead is we are going to go ahead and just make like a map manager. Like this. We'll have a constructor here. Why not? And then we are going to actually define the map on this. I'm trying to think about how I want to do this. So for the map, I mean, like you have like this background layer of how the map should look, and then you'd also have like your foreground objects, like your entities and stuff. And so when this map manager spins up, it's almost like we need a function called load map. Right now we could have like a set of map IDs of const maps is equal to, and we'll say ID of testing. And then we could just simply put something like this into the map. All right, so the idea is that I have this other thing called an entity manager, which actually holds on to all the entities. And when you push something into this array, it actually broadcasts it to all the clients, and the clients can do something to show that on the page. So my question is, the map shouldn't be, like, unless the underlying map is changeable, then they probably shouldn't be as entities. And so we could probably just like share the map with the front and the back end and have that like render out the base layer. But as far as the entities are concerned, there are a couple of things that we probably need to do here. So like we could start adding some new things here. Like I could say type is entities dot tree. Let's just try to have a couple of trees on this map. So we'll have like 2 or 3 of them. I do believe we want to do like 40. We'll do like 60 here. By the way, if you guys are watching, leave a little comment in the chat. I want to make sure you guys can actually see this. But yeah, so the idea is you make a map manager and then you do a load map that is going to figure out whether like it has to go and read from disk. Right now I'm hard coding all the maps into this like lookup table. But if you do map of testing, No, this is TypeScript. I'm not going to make Django on my channel, I'll be honest with you all. I'm just working at work on a project that's using Django and Python. I'm just not interested in pivoting my channel to use Django, personally. To invest it in TypeScript, you know? What's up? How's it going, everyone? We got Joshua. We got Opinyami. Opiimi? I'm so bad at names. Maroc? If I ruined your name, I'm sorry. I'm a dumb American. All right, so when we load the map, we need to basically get the map here, and then this thing needs to take in an entity manager. And then we could simply just like say this dot entity manager dot probably clear, and then this dot entity manager. Yeah, probably just loop through all the entities. All right, I'm trying to let this organically grow into a system that I hopefully can keep maintainable. There's some things I need to figure out, like why does auto importing not work sometimes? Like my TypeScript configuration is just broken, but I don't want to take time to figure that out yet. Because right now what happens if I create an entity manager, I'm kind of loading the map information here, like I'm creating a tree and adding it. I would rather have that be managed by the map manager. So we have the map manager, and then we can say this dot map manager dot load map, and then we could say testing. And so the cool thing about this, if I were to have two different maps, which we can test in a bit, we could test just like loading in those different maps on the fly, and the whole game should kind of like change. But still a lot of work we got to do here. So what do we need to do? When we load the map, we have to first I'm going to do this. Yeah, I'm using cursor. This is cursor. Map to load dot entity. Oh, I think it's because this thing probably needs to be typed in some type of way. Tree position. Yeah, I think I actually need to like do a for loop. Entity factory. Do I want to make a factory? Create entity, entity of type, and then it could probably take in an entity. I'll just do it hard code. I'm going to hard code it for right. If the entity.type is equal to entities.tree, then we will make a new tree. We'll set the position. We'll add it. Okay, so we'll have like this giant lookup, this giant if statement branch logic. Based on the type, it'll just create the entities. Oh look, a tree popped up. Can I interact with both of those? I can. So again, the idea is like I can go through here and I can add a bunch of different trees. Save the map, refresh the page. There we go. But one thing we have to figure out is I think the players themselves live inside this entity manager. And so when you load a new map, I don't necessarily think we want to clear out the players. We probably want to, like, we could clear it out, but then we need to find a way to re-add them back in. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and just do like a socket manager here. I think there's a little bit of complexity with how this is all set up. So I'm going to go on a side quest real quick, and then we'll pivot back to what we originally were trying to do. What's up, Daniel Major? All right, socket manager. This is going to do a couple of things. Set up socket. Do I want to put this? Yeah, I think I'll put this in the constructor here. And then go ahead and just paste everything in. That might be needed. So this is going to set the IO. This is like, I'm using socket IO. So this is the server side, and it's going to create that IO object. It's going to instantiate or whatever that IO server thing. No, let me actually not do that. Let me not do that, because I need to think long term. Like, there are going to be multiple game rounds playing inside this game server, and so I'm going to have to make sure that whatever I code can support multiple games and multiple rounds, or I guess you could say maps, all in the same server. So I don't know if I want to do that. I want to keep the server set up. You know, that's I'll handle that later. It's fine. Whatever. That setup socket handlers. So let me go ahead and grab that. Sometimes when you're coding, you go off on like little too many side quests, and then you realize that you are so off of what you should have been doing, and then you need to just go back to what you originally were trying to do. Okay, so I'm trying to abstract away the whole idea of socket IO from the game server. Like, the game server shouldn't know about socket IO and how to send off events. It should have some type of abstraction so that it can just like emit events as needed. And then this thing calls into the game server when certain things happen. So like, I could just go ahead and say this private socket manager. At least that's the idea. What's up, Goofatron, Microsayer? Bro, do you even create GTA 5? I mean, I couldn't. What's your tech stack at work until recently, before you were switching to the Django project? Prior, it was React. So just like a React single page application using ESBuild to build everything. And then we use Node.js on the back end. We deployed that all to serverless using Lambda. We had like, we were getting into using AWS RDS. We were using AWS Dynamo before. We use Elasticsearch. I guess it's actually called OpenSearch. Basically a ton of stuff in AWS. But the main stack was React and Node.js on the back end for the API. Yeah, OPME. Yeah, I think that's the idea. Right now, this is coded in just like each game server can only handle one set of players, right? I haven't like abstracted it well enough so that I can have multiple chat rooms or multiple rooms playing together. That's the plan. But again, just baby steps. I could probably spend time drawing diagrams, like, and trying to really make sure I understand what I'm doing, but that doesn't make for good content, you know? And it's more fun to watch me struggle around. So the first thing I'm going to do is when I construct the game server, I'm going to make this socket manager. And the thing that we're going to have in that socket manager include I'm going to say send event. Send event. And if I go over here, public send event. Basically, it's a shallow wrapper around socket.io. But what we could do here is I can actually call this events. I think it's event. There we go. This is actually going to be called this is actually called broadcast event. But why is this complaining? Argument of type game state is not assignable to parameter type game. Oh, it's complaining about this. Now, let me play around with an idea. Since we're going so into object-oriented programming, why not? So this will have a type of game state updated. Takes in a game state, which in fact this is what I want. I don't know what I'm doing right now, honestly. I've gone off on a tangent and now I'm lost. That's fine. We'll find our way back home. I think I'm trying to make it so like I can just broadcast events, something like this. And then I could just pass in the event here, and that's all I need. So like if I were to go over here, this would take in some type of event. Oh wait, you can't use types there. Let me take a breather. Let me go back to chat real quick. What's up, my people on Twitch? Yeah, I mean, I think object-oriented programming has its place. Like, in terms of a game, it makes sense because you have this whole universe, and everything in the universe is basically its own individual instantiation of like a type, right? So like the tree, it has different properties, and when you get near it, it needs to do different things. My game is broken right now. So I think for simple games, object-oriented programming does kind of make sense, but I think if you start doing too much abstract classes and inheritance, that's when you get yourself into trouble. And so what I'm trying to do is just do a lot of interfaces. So I'm trying not to do any extends. I think it just makes for cleaner code. And I think that's one of the biggest arguments against object-oriented programming is that typically when you start extending things and using inheritance, it just becomes very unmaintainable. Because a lot of times you like try to extend something, but the thing you're extending, like you got to add some additional features. So then you go into the base class and you add stuff that really should not be added to the base class, but it's the easiest approach. And so you do it. And then you end up having this giant base class that has thousands of like things on it that it just doesn't make sense, right? But yeah, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to, let's, sometimes I clear everything. Like, let's just clear everything and go back. I'm trying to, I created a socket manager, which I created in the constructor, okay? And then every time I need to broadcast the game state, I basically create this array of a simple like data transfer object, a DTO. And I convert these complex entity types into like just a JSON object, right? Now I need to clean this up. This is really bad. But once I have that game state, which is basically an array of entities that need to be broadcasted to all the clients, all I do is broadcast the event. Like I said, game state event. And then I wish that, I wish I could figure out what's going on here. So I think I might need to fix in a game state. So this is an array of entities. This needs to take in entities like this. I might call this raw entities. Okay, now that's happy. Why is this not happy? Because this doesn't even extend event. So here's an issue is I need to be able to pass in whatever type of event here, but there's no shared interface or there's no shared like subclass, right? And so to figure out what that needs to be, we can look at broadcast event and try to understand like what does event need to have on it. And so event needs to have a get type, and it probably needs to have a get payload, if that makes sense. And I'm going to do a hack right now. I'm going to call this event thing because I have like another thing called event and it's getting kind of, yeah, I'll call this I event. Here we go. We'll call it I event, which I don't know why this is not importing. I need to fix my TypeScript. There's something wrong with this project in TypeScript where it's like not working. And I could probably do something even more interesting here where these interfaces could actually like know what the type is of the payload. No, I'm not implementing delta compression. I do want to implement that at some point. I put a to-do for it. I might just be overcomplicating this, honestly. Like sometimes in object-oriented programming, you like start overcomplicating everything and you're like, dude, why'd I have to write all this code just to do something simple? So you got to keep that in mind. But we have a game state event. And I mean, there's no TypeScript errors here, although I'm kind of like this code's really nasty. what's happening here? So we broadcast the game state event to the front end, and the client also has like a socket listener, and it calls on game state update when it gets a game state update event. And here, technically this would be a this would change a little bit. There's also something probably built in the type socket IO that has like entities already. I mean, that has like typed events. So I'm probably just wasting my time right now, honestly. Am I using any framework? No, I'm just kind of like hacking stuff together. Export the interface, sir. Okay, so we went off on so many different tangents on what we're trying to do here, but I think we'll get there. We're getting closer. On game state update. I want this to know about the events. I think so. That's another thing that's kind of problematic, is that the backend technically this is not going to be a class when it comes over to the front end. It's just going to be a raw data type. So I wonder if just using a type after all was probably a better approach. But I think the issue with types is like types can really extend or inherit other types, right? Anyway, what this could do is the socket handler, socket manager, when an event comes in, this is not going to be a game state event. This is actually going to be like an ini. I'm going to try a serialize, deserialize. So, state. I'm struggling right now. I'm struggling. Do I like getters and setters instead of... Oh, I just been making the methods. Yeah, so like instead of doing a getter setter that's built into TypeScript, I just do get position. Yo, why is this so hard? Like this should be pretty simple, right? Okay, so the server sends over the game state event. It calls broadcast, and that's going to send over a type and a payload. And then socket.io over here gets an event based on the type, and then it's going to get a payload, which could be anything, because we don't have this type yet, I don't think. And then we need to actually, technically we have to cast it. So I said like const game state event. But this thing, what does it take in? I guess it would take in a game state, wouldn't it? Why is this complaining? Player ID entities. Should have just used Unity, you know? Because I'm like having the same name for a lot of things. Like the client has a game state thing. The server has a game state event, which takes in a game state. So it's getting kind of confusing. Is going to broadcast the entities. Okay. This thing just needs to be whatever. I'll just say like entity. But that's also the wrong thing. This needs to be whatever this is. Help me, Daria. I don't know what I'm doing. Well, delta compression is only sending the things that update. So like right now, the logic is set up so that every game tick, it just takes a snapshot of the current state array and it just sends it over to the client. That's not delta compression, right? Instead, you would want to find a way to find the entities that have changed. So like if you have 100 zombies that have just like sat still and haven't moved, nothing on them has changed, there's no reason to send that information to any of the clients. Excuse me. Yeah, I'll probably make this open to contributions when I get to a state that I feel like it's good. Right now, if you try to contribute to it, like I'm refactoring code constantly because I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't want a bunch of people also pushing code and then we have to go and like fix a bunch of merge conflicts. So I want to like lay out the groundwork and make sure I understand what I'm doing because I haven't built a game before. And more specifically, I'm kind of building it like a game engine, right? And so if it's built incorrectly from the get-go and then everyone just starts adding stuff on, it's just going to become a big tangled mess. I got all this nasty stuff. On game state update. Here's the socket manager. Yeah, right now a lot of my code I'm like doing like casting and stuff. Daria, you're too smart. I don't even know what you're saying. Like that's the problem. On game state update. So we got this game state update event. Unfortunately, like you have to do this weird casting stuff, which feels kind of wrong. Like this shouldn't even need to know. Yeah, why do I have to do that? That's weird. Get payload should return the game state. Okay, yeah, I don't know what I was doing there. Yeah, why do I have I could just put this here. I don't need a whole method for that. All right, so I'm changing this up a little bit. The entity manager, like, is this shared object that keeps track of like all the entities and stuff. But I think I need to somehow map, like this is going to create a player. Yeah, and this is going to keep track of the players. Let me go back over here. On player input. Oh, I think I already have on disconnect. All right, what's going on here? So when I create this socket manager on the server, it's listening for people to connect. So like this is being instantiated up here. When a connection happens, it calls on connection. And then that's going to give us a unique socket ID, which we can use when we create the player, because we're going to map the socket ID to the player entity ID. There's two different IDs in the system. There's entity IDs and there's like the actual player ID. So we have to like have a lookup table for that so that when the player disconnects in the future, we know what entity needs to be removed. Second thing we're doing here is like we're emitting to the player their own ID so they know what entity on the screen they can control and follow. And what else? Player input. So this is listening for when the user were to change anything on their keyboard. I send over like just like a small little data structure so I know like if the player's pressing up, down, space, whatever. And then finally we have on disconnect. So the main change that I did is I have the entity manager is what's going to be in charge of like a lot of this stuff. So like this dot. It'd be nice if there's some helper functions here. I don't think I have any helper. Get nearby entities. Where was that defined before? It was defined here. Is this even used anymore? It's not. So like I think what I'm doing is I'm trying to add a bunch of helper functions into the entity manager so that if you want to get all the entities near a certain position, you could easily just call a function to do it. And I need to rethink this as well. But every time I work on this project, it's getting a little bit cleaner, and that's kind of the goal. Is like, can I just make this a better thing? So we make the entity manager, then we make the socket manager. This takes in the entity manager, and then it's going to start calling all these different methods on it. Such as this one. This needs some TypeScript help. I'm not going to lie. This is some nasty stuff I'm doing, but... Remove harvestable entities. Okay, what's that? What's that doing? No, I'm not using any libraries right now. I'm just kind of like making everything myself. And no, I haven't explained the project structure. I'm just kind of like hacking at it, trying to get it into a better state than it was before. Because right now this code is probably completely broken. Yeah. All right, what's going on here? So we have some more red. What's going on here? So remove harvestable entities. Yeah, I just need to fix that. Got some red everywhere. Update positions. What is this doing? This could probably be some type of, it's like physics system or something, but prior. Entity type is a bullet. Then we update it. Now I might just do this. Okay, well, the backend is still crashing. Let's see. Broadcast game state. This.players.value. So this, I think, needs to just go away. Okay. The trees are showing up now, which is good. But now we have to figure out why the client is not showing up. So like what I'm going to do is go to network. We're going to go to WebSockets, which is already clicked. And we're going to click on this one. And there's going to be a lot of stuff come over, so that's not going to help us too much. I guess I could filter through. And what I'm trying to find out is your ID coming over? You know, sometimes it's easier just to console log stuff. So like when the socket manager over here, we got player connected, but we should also have here, emit UID. Is this actually getting called? It is, player ID of 4. And so what we could do is try to find if this is being referenced in the front end. Are we getting that in the front end? So we'll go back to the front end, refresh it. We do, we get a 5. And so that's getting correctly set up. I think there's just an issue with What's up, Amos? How's it going? Hey, what's going on here? This thing should be positioning me over the player, and I wonder if maybe the player is not player client. Yeah, that's not getting hit. Not latest entities. Type tree. Yeah, so there's no player object coming over here. I think that's the issue. That is the issue. How do we fix that. So we have to go back to the server, find broadcast, game state. I think prior the players were not pushed into the entities array. Yeah, Aaron, I can give an overview in a second. This makes a player. Yeah, I'm not pushing it. That's probably why. This dot entity manager dot add entity. Add the player. Is that the issue? Yeah, there we go. Let's go. I'm telling you, like, this is the you can't code without types. It's just, I don't know why you'd want to code without types. Because often when types, you just fix all the red and like your game just works. Like your code just works. Creating a player. Let me clean up some of this console log stuff. Okay, another issue. Why are there so many players? I think when I'm disconnecting, it's not it's not clearing them out. So yeah, again, server, socket manager, find disconnect, which this needs to say remove the entity. This that players I get, remove the entity. What does this take? Oh, mark entity. I think is what it's called. Oh, I'm an idiot. I'm deleting it and then I'm getting it. Like, that should fix it. Yeah, harvest all that tree. Cool. I think this is working now. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it better than it was when I started the stream? I think so. And I think a good tip is like, especially when you're doing object-oriented programming, high cohesion, low coupling, right? That's what they always tell us. And what does that actually mean? It means that if you were to go and open up this project and you want to find some logic related to a player, high cohesion means you have a lot of the information and state around how a player works inside some co-located part, whether that's a class and that has all the player information, or you have a folder that has all the player related logic and stuff. So when you're writing code and you start seeing these different things that know too much about everything else, it makes sense to like break them off into their own managers, their own systems, their own entities, so that you don't have a bunch of unrelated logic next to each other. Like for example, another good approach is like if you were to comment out a function and nothing else needs that function in your file, like maybe it should live somewhere else. But let me commit this. I'm going to say refactoring to use a input manager on the backend. All right, Aaron, I can give you an overview if you're here. Just say yes if you are. think the arrow. I don't like the arrow. All right, so here is the rough overview of everything. I'm trying to do a monorepo approach. So I have like 3 main packages. I got the dashboard, and that is responsible for the actual like Next.js application. I plan to have like you're going to have authentication, right? You need to be able to sign in, sign out, manage your account, view leaderboards, stuff like that. And that is stuff that I think Next.js and React will do a lot better with. Like you can have overlaid widgets here. You can have different pages that you'll need. Maybe you want an in-app store, right? You can do that using Next.js. At least that's my approach. You could also do it all in the game client itself. I just think that that would require a lot of extra work, because then you have to like do your custom hover events on buttons, and you'd have to basically implement a lot of the stuff that's built into the browser all over again. Like when you hover over a tree, or when you hover over a button, or I don't know. Hey, what's up, Lazar? Lazar, did I say your name right? Nikolov, hope you're doing well. Let me give you a shout out real quick. Hold on. Yeah, for those watching, go follow Lazar. Am I pronouncing your name right? Lazar? Nikolov? He was doing a bunch of clean architecture stuff at one point. He's getting a lot of... Let's see what else he's been doing lately. I haven't been kind of paying attention to other people. Look at you, 51,000 views, 31,000 views. Yeah, he's doing some really cool stuff. Really cool channel. And he, like, the vibe to his setup is just really cool. So go check him out. Welcome to the stream. I'm so sorry. I was giving an overview and I got distracted. Story of my life, right? Yeah, so again, monorepo. We have Next.js for the dashboard. I explained why. And the way this works is the package.json has a dependency on the game client. The game client is another folder right here, right? So it just kind of imports that submodule and uses it, right? I don't understand how HTML is going to help when you hover over a tree. Yeah, in terms of the tree and stuff, it's not going to help. I'm saying, like, let's say you want to have in-app purchases or something like that. Would it be easier to just have a simple Next.js route with cards and buttons that you can click and then hooks in the stripe? You know, like there's like a division of like what should live inside of Next.js and what should live not. Because technically you could make everything. You can make literally everything with HTML, with Canvas. It's just going to be a lot more work, in my opinion. But yeah, so the Next.js dashboard imports the game client. And the game client, if I were to look at the page here, all I do is I import the game client. And when this page mounts, I basically give it a reference to the canvas. And I give it a WebSocket URL. And that's when it starts setting up all of the input listeners. It sets up the client loop, the render loop. It, you know, starts listening for the WebSocket events. And so technically I could have like multiple of these things on the page if you want to. So I'm trying to like modularize, make this stuff modular a little bit. So now let's move on to the game client, because the game client over here has a constructor. Again, it takes in that WebSocket URL and a canvas. And this is where all the logic is for like when I resize the window, it changes the canvas size. It starts setting up all these client-side systems, like the camera manager, the map manager, which we'll have to kind of come back to that and figure that out. But somehow we have to like share the map that's on the back end and tell the front end, like, this is what you need to show. Right now, it's kind of hard-coded in 2 places. But the map manager on the front end should be responsible for understanding where all the style sheets are, the sprite sheets are for the front end, like how to display the map, how to render those out, etc. And then we have like a game state that's a client-side state. So like we keep track of what is our player ID. So when we load up the UI, the backend sends a player ID to us, and we can store that somewhere. This is kind of like a giant Redux store or like a giant Zustand store, in a sense. I don't know why I say it. It's just it's a JavaScript object, right? And so this game state changes over time based on the sockets that come in from the backend. Let's look at the input manager. The input manager, I might actually put here instead. This is basically doing all the bindings for like, okay, when a user presses a key down or a key up, we modify this object here, and then we use that object and compare it to what it used to be prior, so that I have like some type of, so that I'm not sending off events every single time the client render loop happens or the client update loop happens. So I keep track of, did the player actually change their inputs? And if they did, we go ahead and just broadcast that out. I think there's a, somewhere over here, there's like a, excuse me, yeah, update loop. So if the input manager has changed, we go ahead and just get the inputs for this current player. We send it over to the backend, and the server stores that somewhere so it can start processing. And then we reset the events. What does reset do? That's changed. Okay. Let's keep going back up. So the socket manager, this is where it starts to get a little bit more important. The socket manager, when, oh, what's going on here? On connect. This feels wrong. Hold on. This.getID. I don't think I even need this. I don't think I need this yet. Let me delete it. Okay, I think that simplified it. Yeah, so there's two things we're listening to from the backend. Basically, the backend is running its game loop, and then when something happens, such as when you connect, it figures out what your entity ID is, and it sends it over to you and says, hey, this is what the entity is you should be following around. Like it's basically your player ID, which is technically entity ID. And then that is used in various places in the front end, such as a camera manager, to basically look up the entity based on your player ID, and then it, you know, changes the transformation of the context of the canvas that we're drawing out to follow the player around. Okay. And let's find out where translate to is happening. Position camera on player. Sorry, there's like a lot going on here, so I'm trying to like figure out the best way to walk you through it. We'll cover that in just a second. Let's go back to the on game state update. So that's the thing we've just been like refactoring this whole stream is every game tick, the server sends over its like snapshot of the world, and then the client has to render that out. And so what we do is we take the current state of all the entities that come over there and we store it in a latest entities array. And then later on, we're going to process over those entities and do some things with them. So that's kind of how the front end and the back end are communicating. And again, the back end is going to be calling those emits to send over these game events. I need to refactor this one to also send over some type of event, but whatever. Then we have like, let's see, let's find, in fact, let me just collapse a lot of this stuff. I need to refactor this a little bit still, but okay, here we call start render loop. Okay, so there's a render loop that basically keeps drawing to the canvas every animation tick, I guess you could say, every animation frame. Super rudimentary, but I'm also calling update in here, which might not be the best. I should probably have a separate update loop going on in the front end, but whatever. But let's look at update. So every time the front end client does its tick, it needs to do a couple things. First of all, it needs to figure out if the input has changed. So has the player pressed a button, and is that input different than what you just sent off last tick? If it is, we go ahead and send it off to the backend, and yeah, that should make sense. The backend's going to take that input and do stuff with it. And then we need to loop through all of the entities. So I have update entities here. And what this is doing is the backend basically sends over an array of entities, and that array of entities can grow in size. It can also shrink in size, right? So for example, when I were to shoot a bullet, that bullet goes for a certain distance and then it gets removed from the game. Same thing with the tree. When I consume the tree, that gets removed from the array of entities. And so the front end basically does like a diff, and it says, okay, I just saw my current state of entities. I only know about 2 trees, but now I got another thing of entities and it has 3 trees. So it does a diff and it says, okay, let's go ahead and construct a new entity. I think this is actually where it's happening down here. Let me actually put a comment here. Remove dead entities. And I'll say add new entities. Add/update. So put a pin in what I was just saying. Let's look at the first one. So if that array were to shrink, if the backend decides that it wants to, like, 3 people picked up a bunch of trees and those entities are just gone, they're completely gone from the game. This is basically saying, hey, loop through the current entities that I know about, like the actual like game state, the server state. And then if I have entities that I shouldn't even have anymore, just go ahead and remove those. All right. Actually, I think I said that wrong. It's looping through all the entities that the client knows about. And if those don't exist in the game state, then it removes them. I think I need to rename the latest entities. Second thing over here. What's up, Paula? What am I using on the back end? Just Node.js. So down here, this is where if we see a new thing in that data structure that comes over, we basically say, hey, if this thing's already existing, we just do an object assign to update all of its like internal data structure values to match what the server is. And down here, if there's something new, we just create one, right? So we check, we have like this big if statement that says if the entity that came over is a player, we create a new player. We go ahead and set the positions, the velocities, and then we push that into the entities. Get into this thing needs to be refactored. Hold on. Do I have an entity manager? I don't. All right, let me not refactor yet, but that's the idea. So the backend is basically adding and removing entities. The front end has to reconcile those differences and either create its own representation of how those things should work, and then it renders them. Okay. What else is there? Okay, yeah, also during this update loop, we basically say, okay, after we've updated all the entities, we have to figure out where the player currently is, because the front end probably just moved the player a little bit, and we have to reposition the canvas. So that's what is calling this, which is basically finding the current player entity ID, and then it is going to translate the camera to follow that player. So technically, you could actually like have it follow anything. It doesn't have to follow a player. You just have to say, hey, you need to follow this point. And so if you wanted to have some type of like in-game cinematic thing, you could, do some custom code to do that. I highly doubt we're going to. Or if you wanted to add in like a shake logic. So like, let's say a grenade goes off next to your player and you want to shake the screen. You could potentially move the camera somewhere and then have it interpolate slowly back to the player, right? So it just kind of gives you this flexibility to do that. Although I don't know if I have, oh yeah, I do have interpolation here. So I could literally just say like, grenade goes off, go ahead and move. Actually, what is this doing? Translate to. I'd probably need to modify this a little bit and say like set position. Or I could just add in a shake method with like an intensity and then like, I don't know, get the idea. Okay, so that's kind of that's the update for the client side. Let's look at the back end. So the back end, or sorry, not the back end. Let's look at the render of the front end. Basically, it just loops over all those entities and renders them out. And it does that after it renders out the map. So the map needs to be rendered first because it's at a lower layer. And then it renders out all the entities that live on top of the map. So like you can see here, we have like the background map, which is a 2D grid, and then we render out all the entities. There might be a way to combine these into one data structure and then add some type of ordering inside of them. so that I can kind of do like it could sort the array and figure out like what is the render order, kind of like a Z index, but keeping it simple. Excuse me. Let's see, render entities. So like, let's figure out how we render stuff out on the front end. So like we have like these entities on the front end over here. We have a bullet. And there's still stuff I'm trying to figure out. Like, it's kind of confusing. We have a bullet thing on the front end, and then we have a bullet entity on the back end. And it turns out that the back end bullet, you know, it might have more logic. Like it has like this update call. And the update call is what determines its real position on the screen. Right now, the front end doesn't need to do that. It just needs to basically move the bullet to match what the game state is. If you wanted to do some like client-side interpolation, then yeah, you could probably add in like an update call here, and then the client could try to update with some synchronized tick. Yeah, I know. I could probably use a framework. So I'm having some fun, you know? But yeah, the basically the idea of these entities, the client-side entities, they just have like a render method, and then you figure out how to render those onto the screen. Same thing with the player. Rendering some stuff out. Got some interpolation here. Yeah, I think that's it for the front end. Obviously a complete mess. So now let's look at the back end. So we have the game client, which is importing a couple of packages from the back end. You'll see here it has a dependency on the game server. Let's look at game server. How this works is when I run the application, it spins up a game server object, right? And based on a certain port, this is going to spin up that socket.io listener on that port. And then it creates an entity manager, a map manager, it loads a map, and then it starts the game loop. So we kind of talked about how some of this stuff works. The entity manager is in charge of like holding on to all the entities and having a bunch of utility functions you can use to find entities, remove entities, filter entities, stuff like that. Marking entities for deletion. Oh, it also has a built-in incrementer. So every time you add a new entity, it is basically... Actually, sorry, before you create an entity, you're supposed to generate a new ID so that every entity has like an auto-incrementing unique ID. And the reason we're doing that is so that you can like differentiate between the front and the back end as entities are getting added in and removed. But let's see, start game loop. What is this doing? So yeah, we have like a game loop. Just a rudimentary set interval every 30 ticks a second. It calls this .update. And what this is doing is getting the change. So it's getting the delta time, like how much time has elapsed since the last update. And then it needs to loop through all the entities and update them all. Hey, what's up, Josh Manders? How's it going? All right, so update entities. What is this doing? Again, it's just looping through all the entities, and based on the entity type, it's updating them. I think this should be simplified at some point to just say entity.update. That's the goal. I shouldn't have this giant if statement. Like this shouldn't care about how the entities update. All it needs to do is just call them. So that's kind of like what I'm going to work on next. And then there's like a little bit of game state logic. So there's like remove harvest entities, which loops through all the harvestable entities and figures out if they have been harvested yet. And then it kind of like runs the game logic to remove those from the game. This also probably needs to be refactored. I feel like this should live in the tree or harvestable trait itself. It just feels weird that like the logic for what happens when you harvest something is encoded inside this like server object. I think this needs to be pulled out and put somewhere else. But and then finally, it calls entity manager.prune entities. What this is doing is just looping through all the entities that have been marked for deletion, and it just removes them. And then it broadcasts the current game state to all the clients. So if you have like 5 browser tabs opened, it's going to broadcast that game state to everybody. Yeah, I think that might be the overview. And then if you look at the back end, like we have some entities over here, like the bullet. Let's look through this. So we have a bullet entity. And right now I'm doing it extends on this entity sub abstract class. I might actually like go towards a different approach. The reason I'm doing this is because every entity needs access to the entity manager so that it can interact with other things in the universe, I guess. And I felt like just doing an abstract entity would make that easier. The only other approach is like you could have some type of static entity manager .find, but then like I started thinking about if I want to have multiple game instances running on the same machine, I don't want like shared static variables everywhere. And so this is the approach that I took, which is why every time we construct an entity, like if you do new bullet, you'll see that it just basically needs to pass in the entity manager reference to these different entities so they can do something with them later on. But yeah, continuing on, how does a bullet get set up? There's still more I need to talk about. So on the server side of things, I think there is an input manager. Let's go to managers. Oh, there's not. How does this work again? On player input. Okay, so the socket manager has an on player input, which is looking for what the player's keyboard is. Like what is the current input state of the player? And then that moves the player around and sets its directional velocity based on those inputs. So like if you're holding up and down, it'll set it to point to a certain direction. And then it also sets the current player input on the player object itself. I feel like some of this stuff should maybe live in the player entity. I feel like this is bleeding over game logic into a socket manager, so I don't know. I feel like, oh, yeah, let's just do that. But again, when does on player input happen? Yeah, right now, every time a player's input changes on the front end, it sends over, and this will fire once, which is kind of hacky. Instead, I would rather just set the player input, and then later on, when I think we're trying to update the players, it should check the input. So I started getting into that where like, okay, every time the player updates, look at its current input and try to figure out like what it should be doing. So in our case, if you were to press space on your keyboard, it's going to set fire to true. And then we have like a fire cooldown, so you can only fire so many bullets a second. And then this is creating a bullet from, this is creating a bullet entity. And it's setting the position of that bullet. It's setting the direction of that bullet. And then it basically adds it to the entity manager. And then the bullet will start running through and getting updated every tick, which will just move it in a certain direction. I think there's some things we could add in to make the physics side of things more generic. Like you could just add in in fact, I already have a movable. The fact that this thing is moving, travel distance, what is this doing? Movable. Yeah, the fact that this thing has like an update, I feel like if you have more projectiles, you're going to have to like copy and paste the same logic. And so I think having some type of system that just automatically moves things every game tick for you automatically might be pretty cool. I mean, if you use any type of like physics engine framework, like it kind of does that for you automatically. You just set a velocity or acceleration objects and then it'll just move them for you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I missed on anything, Aaron, let me know, but that's kind of like the overview. And you're more than welcome to look through the code. Again, like I would just don't do any major refactorings unless like if you want to come through here and try to add new entities, you could do that. But everything else, I'm still trying to wrap my head around like what I want to do. Like where do I want to take this? How do I want to structure it? At some point it'll be, let me see what you said there. You are streaming in science and tech category. Oh, my bad. I thought I was in gaming. What is the technique? Is software and game development. There we go. So when you click D, it sends start going right event. When you release D, it sends stop pressing right. Pretty much. But it's not sending an event that says start going right. It's sending over the current state of the client's input. Like if I were to go to the client input, this is what it sends to the backend if it changes. So like what direction, in fact, I could probably change this to be like up, true, something like that. I just did DX and DY, but like based on the keys that you're pressing down, it'll update this input, and then the input will get sent to the server, and the server holds on to your current input state so that as it's looping through the update function call, it can do different things based on your input state. Again, a lot of stuff is just like, this is a proof of concepts. Don't read through this code and be like, oh, this is how game dev is. I don't know what I'm doing, right? But I'm trying to, I know a lot of games do like an entity system, I believe. I just don't know if I'm implementing it correctly. What's my keyboard? I just use something called Clack app. It's like a virtualized keyboard. It just plays noises when I type. Let me read Daria's comment. At some point, it's going to become awkward when you don't want to clear the canvas on every frame. Say a minimap that can be expensive to render all at once. I mean, how expensive is rendering a minimap? I guess I'd ask. Because it's just a rectangle. And then your minimap would have a couple of dots on it, right? You'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 entities on it. And so doing a for loop over 5 entities to render them out on a minimap, I wouldn't think that would be slow to do, right? I guess you also need to loop over, if you wanted to actually draw the map itself on the minimap too, I guess then you're rendering a lot of things. But I think also what you'd have to do is like, at some point you bring in some type of, what is it called, like a, is it a B tree? Not a B tree, it's called what is it called? Is it a quad tree? It's a quad tree. Yeah, so like in terms of efficiency, like at some point, I think what you end up doing is like right now, if I wanted to render out the map, let's say the map was huge. Let's say we had like thousands of trees all over the map. Do you really need to run through and try to render out trees that aren't on the screen? Probably not, right? So you just need to figure out what are the closest entities to your player, and you could just do like a rudimentary like Euclidean distance between your player and the other entities, and then just render out the ones that should be displayed up to a certain extent. And I've seen that really improve performance because now you're just looping over and drawing the things that need to be rendered. Everything else you just skip over. Add a fog of war. Yeah, that'd be cool too. I think something that'd be really cool, Daria, I don't know if you've done this before, is like bringing in shaders so that you could have a torch and then the torch would actually light up based on like, you know what I'm saying? Like that'd be really cool to do. I don't know if you need shaders for that. I think if you wanted to have individual objects react to the torch or flashlight, I think you might. I think I've tried implementing that a long time ago where like I just hacked it by having like a transparent PNG over the player so that I make everything outside his field of view just turn dark. And then it's just like a giant overlay on the map so that based on your flashlight, it'll scale up that PNG. If you have like low flashlight power, it would scale it down. That might be something cool to add in. Actually, let me do that. Yeah, I've also been fighting like a upper respiratory infection for the past week. I went on a cruise, and the last day of the cruise, I just started coughing. Like, I feel like I stirred up COVID or something. Like something on the ship. I was packing. I was on the floor, like picking stuff up from the toys and all my kids' stuff. And then I just started coughing nonstop. Like it just didn't stop. And I've gotten back, and I just been coughing like up phlegm for the past week. So I probably just caught a cold, and it just kind of like triggered that day. But yeah, I keep clearing my throat. Sorry, it's not even related to what I'm doing, but what made you want to build a 2D game using JavaScript instead of Unity? I also want to build one, so that's why I ask. I think if you want to build a serious game, you should probably be using Entity or a game engine. There's Phaser, there is Pixie.js, there is, I think, React Pixie. There's one called there's one called Excalibur. So if this is more of like a learning experience and just something I can do to kind of teach TypeScript and try to understand how to build a game engine. So this is more for me, like me just wanting to have fun. But if you seriously want to build a game, I would recommend like use a game engine. I've played around with Unity. C# is a really nice language as well. I think Unity is really cool. I don't know, can Unity export to run in a browser? I think that's the one thing I'm trying to do is I want to make this all TypeScript based, which again, I could use with Excalibur framework, but yeah, I guess I answered that question. Join reuse library. I'm just using vanilla TypeScript. Can you update to remove things already done? Yeah, I'll have to go through here and figure out what I've already done, honestly. Yeah, it could be pneumonia. I mean, right now it's not bad. I mean, I'm on the downswing of it. This one's weird. It's like usually when I get like a respiratory infection, like my nose is super stuffed all the time and like constantly blowing my nose. This one's just like coughing up phlegm. Every once in a while, I cough up some phlegm. Unity can export in WASM. Okay, cool. Yeah, since I have you guys here, I'll just do a quick question. Like, what other features would you think you want added to this game? The idea is I'm trying to build out a cooperative base building / survival zombie game. Where you basically have, I don't know if you played the game Don't Starve. I played that with my family a lot. It's a really fun game. But the same idea where you all spawn in a particular map, and then your goal is you have to go around and like harvest different materials, chop down trees, pick up grass, maybe go exploring into abandoned areas that have random zombies walking around. And the idea is I want to have a day and night cycle, right? So during the daytime, you go and you try to explore, harvest, fight, so that at night you can actually like have a base built and you're ready to defend it. And if you and your whole team dies, the game ends. I wanted to add cool features where, like, let's say you're playing with a friend, your friend gets killed, you can go over and revive them, kind of like Call of Duty. You just have to go and hold E on them for like 5 seconds. So it's kind of like, it makes it a little bit tricky because you have to make sure you clear out the map. You can't just go over there and revive them. You have to kind of like strategically plan it. But yeah, just add in different things like crafting, maybe the ability to build barricades. Like I could go over here and like build, a wall. If I were to pick up enough trees and grass and whatever else, maybe like stone, I could build walls, build spike traps, build auto turrets, something like that. I think that would be really cool. And then of course add in-app purchases and become a multimillionaire, right? That's the ultimate goal. What more can you ask for? Backpack management. Yeah, I think an inventory system would be nice. Health packs, bandages, you could craft those things, you could find them, you can find different weapons. What else? I wanted to add melee fighting. Is that how you say it? So like you could pick up different like baseball bats and stuff and swing them. But that's going to get tricky because then it's like you have to coordinate zombie animations, and I think just having like a pistol or a shotgun or a rifle, stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. Does that sound fun? Yeah, definitely NFTs. I think that that goes without saying. You need NFTs, and then of course skins, right? This is like your base skin that I found online for free. But yeah, why not? You could have him like have a gold chain around his neck, and that could be like a $5 in-app purchase. Maybe I could give out WebDev Cody bucks, and you can use them inside the game. There's just so much potential of what we could do. But I do want to try to keep it simple. I want to be able to play the entire game with one hand, right? I don't want to have to even use my mouse, which is why the approach I'm going with is I want to focus more on the base building and not like an action shooter. Because again, I like to sit in bed like with my family, and playing with one hand just makes it easier, in my opinion. Maybe even like you can click on different areas and your player will walk to it. So yeah, a lot of stuff we need to add in. Aaron, if any of those things sound fun to work on, like we need zombies, so we can add a zombie and have it walk towards the player. We need pathfinding. The pathfinding we'll have to figure out because yeah, pathfinding will be interesting. I'm not sure if I want to be able to place things on a grid, like grid-based buildings. Yeah, we probably want to keep it all grid-based and make it easier. Collisions, that's something I need to add on next, right? When I move around, I need to start being able to collide with stuff. I haven't even added that. Do I even have that? Collide? I'm going to add it again. No, stop. You're describing a game that already exists in browser, but without zombie logic. I remember there was one like that. Yeah, I mean, if you, needs a monthly battle pass. Yeah, subscribe and you'll get in-app gems. Or it'd be like bottle caps, like Fallout. Yeah, that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'm just gonna work on this for a while. I honestly, like, if you guys watched that last video, I'm kind of tired of making videos on Next.js and like frameworks and stuff. I might throw in a couple here and there because honestly, like, I'm gonna have sponsored videos and no one's gonna sponsor me for building out a game unless Hathor comes back to me again. So I do need to like still make content around Next.js. I'm so tired of like web development, unfortunately. But I'm not completely like removing web development from my channel for now because I mean like this is the Next.js application that has like an embedded game in it, right? So there's going to be Next.js content that I can talk about. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. Hope you guys enjoyed. I might stream tomorrow. We'll see. But yeah, just hit me up, Aaron, if there's anything that you want to work on. I know there's a lot going on where you live, so I'm praying for you. Stay safe. Yeah, anything else you guys want to talk about? No? Okay. Cool, man. Well, I will talk to you all tomorrow, maybe. If not, maybe sometime randomly I'll kick off a stream and we can just continue building on this. All right, have a good day. Happy coding, and I'll be on Discord.